There are moments in life that split your existence into two distinct halves: everything that came before and everything that comes after. Standing behind that coffee counter, with the afternoon sun cutting through the dusty windows of the Velvet Bean Cafe, I had no idea I was living in the final seconds of my before. He stood there in front of me, this man I had dismissed as just another wealthy customer with too much money and too little purpose. His silver-streaked dark hair was perfectly groomed. His charcoal suit probably cost more than 3 months of my rent. And his eyes, those haunted, searching eyes, were fixed on my face with an intensity that made my hands tremble around the ceramic mug I was holding. "I know what really happened to your mother," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, yet thundering through my entire body like an earthquake. "I know because I was there the night she was murdered. I was there, and I've been carrying the weight of that secret for 25 years. The mug slipped from my fingers. I didn't hear it shatter against the tile floor. I didn't feel the hot coffee splashing against my ankles. I could only hear the roaring in my ears, the violent pounding of my heart, and those words, those impossible, devastating words, chowing in the hollow chambers of my chest. Murdered. Not an accident. Not a random tragedy. Murdered. And this stranger, this man who had been sitting in my section every single day for the past 6 weeks, had been carrying the truth all along. Before I tell you what happened next, before I reveal the secrets that had been buried for a quarter of a century, I need you to understand who I was before that moment. I need you to understand the woman I had become. Battered by life, hardened by disappointment, but still standing, still fighting, still believing that somewhere, somehow, there had to be something more. If this story is already gripping your heart, I want to know. Drop a comment right now and tell me where in the world you're watching from. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button, because what I'm about to tell you will shake you to your core. This is a story of buried secrets, impossible love, and the kind of justice that takes 25 years to find its way home. Trust me, you don't want to miss a single moment. My name is Angela Valdez, though everyone calls me Sarah. I am 30 years old, though most days I feel twice that age. I have a 6-year-old daughter named Marigold, who is my entire universe, my reason for waking up each morning, my motivation to keep pushing through days that feel impossible. I work at the Velvet Bean Cafe, a charming little coffee shop tucked into a quiet corner of downtown, sandwiched between a bookstore that's been there for 40 years and a flower shop that always makes our corner of the street smell like roses and fresh possibilities. I've worked there for 3 years now, ever since my husband Lysander decided that his secretary was more interesting than his wife and daughter, packed his bags, and disappeared into a new life without looking back. That's the thing about being abandoned. It doesn't just happen once. It echoes through every corner of your life, reminding you of every other time someone chose to leave. And for me, that echo stretched back to the very beginning, to a loss so profound that I built my entire identity around its absence. I was 5 years old when my mother died. Her name was Evangeline Valdez, and even now, 25 years later, I carry only fragments of her in my memory. The scent of her perfume, something soft and floral that I could never quite identify. The warmth of her arms wrapped around me at night. The sound of her voice, singing lullabies in Spanish, the words melting into my dreams like warm honey. And then, one October night, she was gone. I was told it was an accident, a tragic, random accident. She was walking home from her night shift at the diner where she worked, and she was struck by a car that never stopped. Hit and run, they called it. The driver was never found. My mother died alone on a cold sidewalk, and I was left to navigate a world that suddenly felt vast and terrifying and impossibly empty. There was no family to take me in. No father, I never knew who he was, and my mother had never spoken of him. There were no aunts, no uncles, no grandparents willing to claim the small, frightened girl who cried herself to sleep every night, calling for a mother who would never come. So I became a ward of the state, a foster child, a number in a system that was overworked and underfunded and unable to provide the love that a grieving little girl so desperately needed. I bounced from home to home for the next 13 years. Some were tolerable, families who did their best but had too many children and not enough resources. Others were nightmares that I still can't bring myself to speak about, even now. And one was different. One was the home that shaped me in ways I'm still trying to understand. Horace and Minerva Renshaw took me in when I was 12 years old. They were pillars of the community. Horace, a successful businessman who owned half the commercial properties downtown. Minerva, a socialite who organized charity galas and sat on the boards of various philanthropic organizations. They had no children of their own, and they presented themselves as generous souls who wanted to provide a stable home for a child in need. On the surface, they gave me everything I could have asked for. A beautiful room in their sprawling Victorian home, nice clothes, good food, an education at the finest private school in the city. But beneath that polished exterior, there was a coldness that seeped into my bones and never quite left. Horace, in particular, had a way of making me feel perpetually indebted to him. Every gift came with an invisible string attached. Every kindness was recorded in some mental ledger that he would reference whenever he wanted compliance. He never raised a hand to me. His cruelty was more subtle than that. It lived in his words, in his silences, in the way he could make me feel worthless with nothing more than a disappointed sigh. I aged out of their care at 18, and I didn't look back. I got a job, rented a tiny apartment, and tried to build a life for myself from the ashes of my fractured childhood. I met Lysander when I was 22. He was charming and attentive and made me feel, for the first time in my life, like I was worthy of love. We married quickly, perhaps too quickly, and for a few years I allowed myself to believe that I had finally found my place in the world. Marigold was born when I was 24, and holding her in my arms for the first time, I felt something shift inside me. Here was a love that was pure and uncomplicated. Here was someone who would never abandon me, someone I would protect with every fiber of my being. But Lysander couldn't handle fatherhood. He couldn't handle the sleepless nights, the financial strain, the way my attention shifted from him to our daughter. He grew distant, then resentful, then absent altogether. By the time Marigold was 2, he was gone, leaving behind divorce papers and a mountain of debt that he had accumulated without my knowledge. So there I was, a single mother with a child to raise, bills to pay, and no safety net to catch me if I fell. I took the job at the Velvet Bean Cafe because the owner, a kind woman named Delphine, was willing to work around my childcare schedule. The pay wasn't much, but it was enough to keep a roof over our heads and food in our bellies. Most days, that was the best I could hope for. I had accepted that my life would be a constant struggle. I had accepted that happiness was a luxury I couldn't afford. I had accepted that the past was the past, buried and irretrievable, and that the best I could do was focus on the future, on giving Marigold the stable, loving childhood that had been stolen from me. And then he walked through the door. It was a Tuesday afternoon, unremarkable in every way. The cafe was quiet, that lull between the lunch rush and the after-work crowd. I was wiping down tables, my mind drifting to the pile of bills waiting for me at home, when the door chimed and a man stepped inside. He was striking in a way that made you look twice. tall and lean, with the kind of posture that spoke of confidence without arrogance. His hair was dark, threaded with silver at the temples, and his face was angular and weathered, like someone who had lived a full life with all its attendant joys and sorrows. But it was his eyes that caught my attention. Deep brown, almost black, and filled with something I couldn't quite name. Something that looked almost like pain. He scanned the cafe slowly, his gaze sweeping across the mismatched chairs, the vintage posters on the walls, the chalkboard menu above the counter. And then his eyes landed on me, and he went absolutely still. For a moment, we just stared at each other. There was something in his expression. Recognition, maybe? Longing? I couldn't place it, and it made me deeply uncomfortable. I was used to being invisible, a background player in other people's stories. Being seen so intensely felt like standing naked under a spotlight. "Can I help you?" I asked, forcing professionalism into my voice. He blinked, seeming to shake himself out of whatever trance had gripped him. "Yes," he said. His voice was deep and smooth, with a slight accent I couldn't identify. "I'll have a coffee, black, and..." He hesitated, his eyes flickering to my name tag. "And a moment of your time, if you can spare it." "I'm working," I said, perhaps more sharply than necessary. "Of course." He nodded, his expression shifting into something carefully neutral. "Just the coffee, then." I made his coffee with hands that were steadier than I felt. And when I brought it to the table he had chosen, a small one by the window, with a clear view of the entire cafe, he thanked me with a courtesy that felt almost old-fashioned. He left a $20 tip on a $3 coffee. And when I tried to tell him he had made a mistake, he just smiled sadly and said, "No mistake." He came back the next day, and the day after that, and every day for the next 6 weeks, always sitting at the same table, always ordering the same black coffee, always watching me with those haunted, searching eyes. At first, I was suspicious. In my experience, men who paid too much attention to women in service jobs rarely had innocent intentions. I kept my distance, was polite but cool, gave him no encouragement whatsoever. But he never made a move, never said anything inappropriate, never asked for my number or tried to follow me home. He would simply sit at his table, nurse his coffee, occasionally read a leather-bound book he carried in his briefcase, and leave generous tips that I couldn't afford to refuse. My coworkers noticed him, of course. Delphine raised an eyebrow the third time he came in, leaning close to whisper, "That man is looking at you like you're the answer to a prayer." "More like a puzzle he's trying to solve," I muttered. "Maybe you're both," she said cryptically, and then moved on to help another customer. His name, I eventually learned, was Caspian Thorn. I discovered this not because he told me, but because one day he received a phone call at his table, and I overheard him answer with, "Thorn speaking." Later, he paid with a credit card, and I caught his first name on the embossed lettering before he slipped it back into his wallet. Caspian Thorn. I turned the name over in my mind like a stone found on a beach, examining it from all angles. It sounded important. Old money. The kind of name that came with family estates and trust funds and generations of expectations. What was a man like that doing in a place like this, day after day, watching a woman like me? I could have asked him. I could have demanded to know why he seemed so interested in my unremarkable life. But something held me back. Some instinct that whispered that the answer might be more than I was prepared to handle. So I did what I had always done when faced with potential upheaval. I kept my head down, did my job, and tried to survive. Survival had become increasingly difficult in those weeks. Lysander, in his infinite cruelty, had stopped paying child support entirely. The courts were slow, my lawyer was expensive, and in the meantime, the bills kept piling up. The rent was past due. The electricity company was threatening disconnection. Marigold needed new shoes because she had outgrown her old ones, and I had been putting off a doctor's visit for a cough that wouldn't go away because I couldn't afford the copay. I was drowning, slowly and quietly, smiling at customers while my world crumbled around me. One evening, after a particularly brutal shift, I came home to find an eviction notice taped to my apartment door. 30 days to pay the back rent or vacate the premises. I stood in the hallway, staring at that piece of paper, and felt something inside me simply break. I had fought so hard. I had done everything right. I had worked and sacrificed and scraped by, all to give my daughter a stable life. And it wasn't enough. It was never enough. Marigold was staying with Mrs. Petrakis, the elderly Greek woman who lived down the hall, and watched her for a fraction of what a real babysitter would cost. I couldn't let her see me like this, red-eyed and trembling on the verge of collapse. So I sat down on the floor of the hallway, my back against the wall, and I let myself cry for the first time in months. That was when my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Delphine, my boss. "Someone left something for you at the cafe," it read. "Thought you should know." I wiped my eyes, confused. Left something? No one ever left things for me. I texted back asking what it was, and her response came quickly. "An envelope. Thick. Pretty sure there's money inside." My stomach twisted. I already knew who it was from. The next morning, I marched into the cafe before my shift started and found the envelope sitting on the counter, my name written on the front in elegant handwriting. It was thick, just as Delphine had said, and when I opened it, I found myself staring at a stack of $100 bills. $10,000 at least, maybe more. There was no note, no explanation, just the money. Caspian walked in for his usual coffee 30 minutes later, and I was waiting for him. I intercepted him before he could sit down, thrust the envelope into his chest, and said through clenched teeth, "I don't know what you think you're doing, but I am not for sale." He looked at the envelope, then at me, and the sadness in his eyes deepened. "I'm not trying to buy you," he said quietly. "I'm trying to help." "I don't need your help. I don't even know you." "No," he agreed, "but I know you. I've known about you for a very long time, Angela." The sound of my full name on his lips stopped me cold. I never used it at work. My name tag said Sarah. How did he know? "Who are you?" I demanded. "What do you want from me?" He was silent for a long moment, a war playing out behind his eyes. Finally, he said, "There are things I need to tell you. Things about your past, about your mother." The floor seemed to tilt beneath my feet. "My mother died 25 years ago." "I know." His voice was barely a whisper now. "I know because I was there." Those words, those impossible, devastating words. That was when the mug slipped from my hands. Except no, that moment came later, weeks later, on the day when he finally told me everything. In that first confrontation, I simply stared at him, my mind unable to process what he was saying. "You're lying," I said. "You're crazy." "I'm neither." He reached into his jacket and withdrew a photograph, old and worn, the edges soft from years of handling. He held it out to me. "Look." I didn't want to look. I wanted to throw the envelope at his feet and walk away and pretend this conversation had never happened. But my hands moved of their own accord, taking the photograph, turning it over. It was my mother. She was young in the picture, early 20s maybe, close to my current age. She was standing in front of a building I didn't recognize, laughing at something off camera, her dark hair blowing in the wind. She looked so alive, so vibrant, so utterly herself. I had very few photographs of my mother. The ones I did have were formal, posed, a school picture, a birthday snapshot. But this one was different. This one captured her essence in a way I had never seen. "Where did you get this?" My voice came out strangled. "She gave it to me," Caspian said. 25 years ago. The night before she died. My legs gave out. I would have fallen if he hadn't caught me, guiding me gently to the nearest chair. I was vaguely aware of Delphine hovering nearby, concern etched across her face. But I couldn't focus on anything except the photograph in my hands and the impossible truth that was slowly, inexorably forcing its way into my consciousness. "Who are you?" I asked again. And this time there was no anger in my voice, only desperation, only the need to understand. Caspian pulled a chair close to mine and sat down. He took a deep breath, and when he spoke, his voice was heavy with 25 years of silence. "When I was 17 years old," he began, "I was homeless, a runaway. I had escaped from a situation that..." He paused, collecting himself. "That's a story for another time. The point is, I was living on the streets, stealing food to survive, sleeping in doorways and abandoned buildings. I had given up on life. I was ready to let the cold take me, to just stop existing." I listened, transfixed, the photograph still clutched in my hands. One night, in late October, I collapsed on a bench outside a diner. I hadn't eaten in 3 days. I was sick, feverish, probably dying. And a woman came out of that diner and found me. "My mother," I whispered. "Your mother?" He nodded. "Evangeline. She worked there. She was about to go home to you, to her 5-year-old daughter who was waiting with a babysitter. She should have called an ambulance and let them deal with me. But she didn't. She brought me inside, made me soup, wrapped me in her jacket, and told me that whatever darkness I was running from, it didn't have to define me." Tears were sliding down my cheeks. I didn't bother to wipe them away. She saved my life that night. Not just my body, my soul. She reminded me that there was still goodness in the world, that there were still people who cared about strangers, that I was worth saving. She came back every night after that, bringing me food, clothes, hope. She told me about you, her little girl with the big eyes and the even bigger imagination. She said you were her whole world, her reason for everything. I pressed the photograph to my chest, as if I could somehow absorb my mother's warmth through the faded paper. "And then," Caspian continued, his voice growing heavy, "on October 27th, she didn't come back. I waited for her all night. And the next morning, I heard the news. She had been hit by a car while walking home. A hit and run, the driver never found. His words hung in the air between us, each one a stone added to a weight I had carried my entire life. The accident. The random, senseless tragedy that had stolen my mother and shattered my world. But there was something in his eyes, something more he wasn't saying. "You said you were there," I said slowly. "You said you were there when she was murdered. But you just told me she was hit by a car. That's an accident. That's not..." It wasn't an accident. 3 words. 3 words that rearranged everything I had ever believed about my own history. "How do you know?" I demanded. "How can you possibly know that?" Caspian's hands were trembling. I noticed that for the first time. This composed, wealthy, seemingly untouchable man was shaking like a leaf in a storm. "Because I followed her that night," he said. "I was worried about her walking home alone so late. I stayed in the shadows, keeping my distance, just making sure she got home safely. And I saw..." He closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, they were filled with an old, familiar horror. I saw the car that hit her. I saw it sitting there, parked on the side street, its headlights off. I saw it start up as she approached, accelerating toward her. It wasn't an accident, Angela. It was deliberate. Someone wanted your mother dead. The cafe around me faded into insignificance. There was only Caspian's voice, only his words, only the terrible truth that was unfolding between us. "Did you see who was driving?" My voice sounded strange to my own ears, distant, detached. "Yes." The word came out on a breath. "I saw. And I've spent the last 25 years carrying that secret, trying to find a way to prove it, trying to find you so I could finally tell you the truth." "Then tell me." I grabbed his arm, my fingers digging into the expensive fabric of his suit. "Tell me who killed my mother." He looked at me with such profound sorrow that I felt it in my own chest, an echoing ache that spanned decades. "The man driving that car," he said slowly, deliberately, "was Horace Renshaw." The name hit me like a physical blow. Horace Renshaw, my foster father, the man who had taken me in, raised me, provided for me, the pillar of the community, the philanthropist, the man whose portrait hung in the lobby of the children's hospital, beneath a plaque thanking him for his generous donations. "No," I said. "No, that's impossible. He didn't even know my mother. He didn't know me until I was placed with him 7 years later." That's what he wanted everyone to believe. Caspian leaned forward, intensity burning in his gaze. But he knew her, Angela. He knew her very well. And he had every reason to want her dead. "You're lying." I pushed back from the table, standing so abruptly that my chair scraped loudly against the floor. "You're insane. This is some kind of sick game." "I have proof." Those 3 words stopped me in my tracks. "I spent the last 25 years building a case," Caspian continued. "I was just a homeless teenager when your mother died. No one would have believed me. I had no resources, no credibility, no power. So I made it my mission to acquire all 3. I worked my way up from nothing, built a fortune, hired investigators. I have documents, financial records, witness testimonies. I have everything we need to prove what Horace Renshaw did. The only thing I was missing was you." "Why me?" "Because you're the key to everything. Because your mother's death is connected to a trust fund that you don't even know exists. Because Horace Renshaw has been stealing from you for your entire life, and the statute of limitations is about to run out on some of the crimes he's committed." He paused, watching me carefully. "And because you deserve to know the truth about what happened to the woman who loved you more than anything in the world." I wanted to dismiss him. I wanted to walk away and pretend this conversation had never happened, to return to my simple, difficult, comprehensible life. But I couldn't, because something deep inside me, something I had suppressed for 25 years, was whispering that everything he was saying was true. I had always known, on some instinctive level, that there was something wrong about Horace Renshaw. The coldness in his eyes, the way he made me feel perpetually indebted, the subtle cruelties disguised as kindnesses. I had always known, but I had never had words for it, never had a framework to understand what I was sensing. Now I did. "Tell me everything," I said, sinking back into my chair. "From the beginning. I want to know all of it." And so he did. The story Caspian told me stretched back decades, before I was born, before my mother ever worked at that diner or dreamed of having a daughter. It was a story of greed and betrayal, of old money and desperate ambition, of a man who would stop at nothing to get what he wanted. My mother, Evangeline Valdez, had grown up poor, but she had something that money couldn't buy. She was the sole heir to a fortune that she didn't even know existed. Her grandmother, a woman named Rosalind Espinoza, had been the secret love of a wealthy industrialist who had built one of the largest manufacturing empires in the state. When he died, he left a substantial portion of his estate in a trust for Rosalind's descendants, a trust that would mature on my mother's 30th birthday. Rosalind died before she could tell my mother about the inheritance. The secret was lost for years. But Horace Renshaw, a young lawyer working at the firm that managed the trust, discovered it. He saw an opportunity, a fortune waiting to be claimed by a young woman who had no idea it existed. All he had to do was make sure she never found out. So he tracked my mother down. He watched her, learned her routines, discovered that she was raising a young daughter on her own. And when she started getting close to her 30th birthday, when the trust company began making inquiries about the beneficiary, he made his move. "He killed her for money," I said, my voice hollow. "Money and power," Caspian confirmed. "With your mother dead, the trust would eventually pass to you, and if Horace could get himself positioned as your legal guardian, he could siphon off the funds for years before you ever reached the age to claim them." That's exactly what he did. He spent years maneuvering himself into a position where he could take you in. He made donations to the foster care agencies, cultivated relationships with social workers, created the perfect reputation of a community-minded philanthropist. And when you were 12 years old, he finally got what he wanted. Legal custody of the heir to a fortune that should have been yours. I thought about my years with the Renshaws, the nice clothes that never quite fit right, the beautiful room that always felt like a gilded cage, the education that came with constant reminders of how grateful I should be, the subtle manipulation, the emotional control, the way Horace always made me feel like I owed him everything. He had stolen from me. Not just money, though God knows he had done that too, but my mother, my childhood, my entire sense of identity. He had taken everything that should have been mine and left me with nothing but a hollow shell of a life. I want to pause here and ask you something. Have you ever discovered that someone you trusted was secretly working against you the whole time? Have you ever looked back at your life and realized that the forces shaping your destiny were darker than you ever imagined? If this story is resonating with you, if you know what it feels like to have the rug pulled out from under your feet, leave a comment below. Tell me your story. Tell me about the moment you discovered that everything you believed was a lie. And don't forget to subscribe if you want to see what happened next, because trust me, this is only the beginning. The days that followed were a blur of revelations and rage. Caspian had rented a suite at the Fontaine Hotel, a grand old building downtown that had been there since the Gilded Age. It was there that he showed me the evidence he had gathered over the past 25 years. There were photographs of my mother, taken in the weeks before her death, showing her with a man I didn't recognize, a private investigator she had apparently hired to look into her family history. She had been getting close to the truth about her inheritance. Someone had tipped off Horace. There were financial records showing the systematic draining of my trust fund. Horace had been clever about it. He had created a series of shell companies and fraudulent invoices, funneling the money through a maze of transactions that were designed to look legitimate. But Caspian's investigators had traced every penny. There were witness statements from people who had known my mother, who remembered seeing Horace's car in the neighborhood on the night she died. There was a mechanic who had worked on Horace's vehicle the next day, repairing damage to the front end that had been attributed to a collision with a deer. And there was one final piece of evidence, the most damning of all. A letter my mother had written to me. A letter she had entrusted to a friend for safekeeping in case anything happened to her. A letter that had been lost for years until Caspian's investigators tracked it down. "My dearest Angela," the letter began, "if you are reading this, then something has happened to me, and you need to know the truth." I read my mother's words through a veil of tears, her handwriting familiar even though I had seen so little of it in my life. She wrote about the trust fund, about her growing unease as she began to investigate her family history, about the feeling that she was being watched. She wrote about a man. She never named him, but she described him in terms that made it clear she suspected he meant her harm. And she wrote about me. "You are my heart, my soul, my reason for every breath I take. Whatever happens, know that I loved you more than words could ever express. Know that everything I did was to protect you, to provide for you, to give you the life you deserve. If I am not there to watch you grow, know that I will be with you always, in the whisper of the wind and the warmth of the sun and the beating of your own precious heart." I folded the letter carefully and pressed it to my chest, sobbing like the 5-year-old girl I had been on that terrible October night. Grief is a strange creature. It doesn't move in a straight line. It circles back on itself, revisiting old wounds just when you think they've finally healed. Reading my mother's letter, I felt like I was losing her all over again. But this time, the grief was mixed with something else, something hot and sharp and fierce. Rage. Horace Renshaw had taken everything from me. He had murdered my mother, stolen my inheritance, and spent the next 25 years pretending to be my benefactor while feeding off my tragedy like a parasite. And he was still out there, walking free, enjoying the fruits of his crimes, while I scraped by in a 1-bedroom apartment with an eviction notice on my door. "What do we do now?" I asked Caspian. We were sitting in his hotel suite, surrounded by files and photographs and 25 years of accumulated evidence. Marigold was with Mrs. Petrakis. I had told her I was working a double shift, hating myself for the lie, but knowing I couldn't involve my daughter in this. "We take him down," Caspian said simply. "We expose him for what he really is." "How?" "He's one of the most powerful men in the city. He has lawyers, connections, politicians in his pocket. No one's going to believe us." "They will when they see the evidence." Caspian leaned forward, his eyes blazing with a fire that I was beginning to recognize as his own form of rage. "I've spent 25 years building this case, Angela. I have receipts for every dollar he stole. I have testimony from every witness who saw something suspicious. I have forensic accountants who have traced his shell companies, and I have a district attorney who owes me a favor." A district attorney? His name is Finian Reyes. He's ambitious and honest, a rare combination in this city. He's been looking for a big case to make his career, something that will prove he's willing to take on the powerful and the corrupt. I've been cultivating him for years, waiting for the right moment to bring him in. And that moment is now? That moment is now. Caspian reached across the table and took my hand. His fingers were warm, his grip strong and reassuring. "But I need you, Angela. I need you to be the face of this case. You're the victim, the orphan, the woman who has been cheated out of her birthright. Your story is the one that will resonate with a jury, with the press, with the public. Are you willing to do this?" I thought about Marigold. I thought about the life I wanted to give her, the stability and security that had always felt just out of reach. I thought about my mother, her letter clutched in my hands, her love reaching out to me across 25 years of silence. "I'm willing," I said. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. I took a leave of absence from the cafe. Delphine was understanding, especially when I hinted that I was dealing with a family emergency. I spent my days in Caspian's hotel suite, going over the evidence, rehearsing my testimony, preparing for the battle that lay ahead. We worked well together, Caspian and I. He was meticulous and thorough, a strategist who thought 10 moves ahead. I was passionate and grounded, a survivor who brought a visceral, emotional truth to our work. In those long hours of preparation, I began to see him as more than just a mysterious stranger who had walked into my cafe and upended my life. I began to see him as an ally, a partner, perhaps even a friend. "Can I ask you something?" I said one evening as we were taking a break from our work. We were sitting on the balcony of his suite, watching the sun set over the city, glasses of wine untouched on the table between us. "Anything. You've spent 25 years on this. You've built an entire fortune, hired investigators, cultivated relationships with prosecutors, all to bring down the man who killed my mother. Why? What's in it for you?" He was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the darkening sky. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with emotion. "Your mother saved my life. Not just that night at the diner, though that was the beginning. She gave me hope. She made me believe that I was worth something, that my life had meaning, that I could be more than just a throwaway kid that nobody wanted. And then she was taken, violently and unjustly, before I could ever repay her kindness." He turned to face me, and I saw tears glistening in his eyes. "I made a promise to myself on the day she died. I promised that I would find the person responsible and make them pay. I promised that I would find her daughter and protect her, the way Evangeline would have wanted. That promise has been the driving force of my entire life. It's why I built my company, why I accumulated my wealth, why I've done everything I've done for the past 25 years. He reached out and touched my cheek, a gesture so tender that it made my breath catch. "You asked what's in it for me. The answer is simple. You are. Your justice, your peace, your happiness. That's what I've been fighting for all this time." I don't know which one of us moved first. Perhaps we moved together, drawn by an invisible force that had been building between us since the moment he first walked into the Velvet Bean Cafe. But suddenly his lips were on mine, and I was kissing him with a hunger and desperation that surprised us both. It was wrong, part of me whispered. He was connected to my past in ways that were still unclear. He had secrets that he hadn't yet revealed. There were 1,000 reasons why I should pull back, protect myself, guard my heart against yet another potential betrayal. But in that moment, I didn't care about any of that. I only cared about the warmth of his body against mine, the taste of his lips, the feeling of being held by someone who truly understood my pain. We didn't go any further that night. We pulled apart, breathless and shaken, and looked at each other with new eyes. Something had shifted between us, something that neither of us was ready to name. We should focus on the case, I said, my voice unsteady. Yes, he agreed. We should. But the case itself was about to take a dramatic turn. It happened 3 days later. I had been preparing for a preliminary meeting with Finian Reyes, the district attorney, when Caspian burst into the room with a look on his face that I had never seen before. Fear. Horace knows, he said. My blood ran cold. What do you mean? He's been tipped off. One of my investigators was compromised. Horace knows we're coming for him, and he's taking steps to protect himself. What kind of steps? Caspian didn't answer immediately. He crossed to the window, staring out at the city as if searching for answers in the sprawl of buildings below. He's cleaning house, he finally said, destroying evidence, silencing witnesses, and he's coming after you. Me? He turned to face me, and the fear in his eyes had given way to something harder, more determined. You're the only living heir to the Espinosa Trust. With you out of the picture, the money reverts to the estate, and Horace has already positioned himself to claim it through a series of shell companies and false legal documents. If something happens to you, he wins. He keeps everything he's stolen, and he walks away free. The room seemed to spin around me. He's going to try to kill me. Not if I can help it. Caspian moved toward me, taking both my hands in his. I'm not going to let anything happen to you, Angela. I've spent 25 years trying to protect you from the shadows. I'm not going to fail now when we're so close to the end. But even as he spoke those words, I could feel the danger closing in around us. Horace Renshaw was a cornered animal, and cornered animals were the most dangerous of all. He had killed my mother to protect his schemes. He wouldn't hesitate to kill me, too. The question was, what was I going to do about it? In the days that followed, I learned what it meant to live under siege. Caspian arranged for security, large, silent men who followed me everywhere, who stood outside my apartment door at night and accompanied me whenever I left. Marigold was confused by their presence, but I told her they were friends of Mommy's who were helping us with something important. She accepted this with the easy trust of childhood, and I prayed that trust would never be shattered. Finian Reyes proved to be everything Caspian had promised. Sharp, ambitious, and hungry for a case that would define his career. When he saw the evidence we had assembled, his eyes lit up with the gleam of a predator catching the scent of prey. This is explosive, he said, leafing through the financial records. If even half of this holds up, Renshaw is looking at decades in prison. It will hold up, Caspian said. I've spent 25 years making sure of it. Reyes looked at him with newfound respect. You really have been playing the long game, haven't you? The longest. But Horace Renshaw wasn't going to go down without a fight. As we prepared our case, he launched a counteroffensive that was as vicious as it was predictable. First came the public relations assault. Suddenly, news stories began appearing about me. anonymous sources questioning my mental stability, suggesting I was a disgruntled foster child trying to extort money from the man who had raised me. Social media was flooded with attacks on my character, digging up every mistake I had ever made, every struggle I had ever faced. Then came the legal maneuvering. Horace's lawyers filed a flurry of motions, challenging every piece of evidence we had gathered, accusing Caspian of conducting illegal investigations, attempting to get the case thrown out before it could even begin. And finally, most devastatingly, came the personal attacks. I was walking Marigold home from school when they struck. Two men in dark suits appeared out of nowhere, blocking our path. Before I could react, one of them had grabbed my daughter, lifting her off her feet as she screamed in terror. "Mrs. Valdez," the other one said, his voice cold and professional. "Mr. Renshaw would like to invite you to a meeting." I didn't hesitate. I didn't think. I threw myself at the man holding my daughter, clawing and biting and kicking with a ferocity I didn't know I possessed. He stumbled back, releasing Marigold, and I grabbed her and ran. We made it half a block before Caspian's security team intercepted us. There was a brief, brutal confrontation. I didn't see the details. I was too busy shielding my daughter's eyes. And then we were being bundled into an SUV and driven away at high speed. "Mommy," Marigold whimpered, her small body trembling against mine. "Mommy, I'm scared." "I know, baby," I said, holding her tight. "I know, but it's going to be okay. Mommy is going to make everything okay." And in that moment, something crystallized inside me. Fear gave way to determination. Helplessness gave way to resolve. Horace Renshaw had crossed a line. He had threatened my daughter, the one thing in this world that I would protect with my dying breath. There would be no more hiding, no more waiting, no more careful legal maneuvering. It was time to end this. I confronted Caspian that night, after Marigold was safely asleep in a secure location under the watchful eyes of his security team. "I want to see him," I said. "Who, Horace?" "Yes." I met his eyes, letting him see the steel that had forged itself in my soul. "I want to look him in the face and tell him I know what he did. I want him to know that he's not going to get away with it." Caspian studied me for a long moment. "That's dangerous. He's already tried to have you abducted once. I don't care." I stepped closer to him, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body. "This man murdered my mother. He stole my inheritance. He raised me as his own foster daughter while he robbed me blind. And now he's threatening my child. I am done hiding. I am done being afraid. I want to look into the eyes of the monster who destroyed my life and show him that he didn't break me." Something shifted in Caspian's expression. The protective concern gave way to something that looked almost like pride. "All right," he said. "We'll do it your way. But we do it smart. We do it with witnesses, with cameras, with Reyes standing by to make an arrest the moment Horace incriminates himself." "Fine," I agreed. "Smart. But we do it soon." "Tomorrow night," he said. "Horace has a charity gala at the Kensington Hotel. Black tie, 500 of the city's most prominent citizens. He thinks he's safe in a crowd, surrounded by people who believe his public image. We'll show him how wrong he is." The gala was exactly as ostentatious as I had expected. Crystal chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings, casting prismatic light across a sea of designer gowns and tailored tuxedos. A string quartet played softly in the corner, the music almost drowned out by the murmur of self-satisfied conversation. This was Horace Renshaw's world, a world of wealth and privilege and carefully constructed respectability. I walked into that world wearing a dress that Caspian had bought for me, a stunning black gown that made me feel like someone I had never been before. My hair was swept up in an elegant style, and around my neck I wore a simple pendant, my mother's, recovered from the evidence files, the only piece of her I had left. Caspian was at my side, handsome in a black tuxedo, his hand warm on the small of my back. Reyes was somewhere in the crowd, waiting with a team of federal agents for the signal to move in. Hidden cameras had been positioned throughout the venue, ready to capture whatever was about to unfold. Horace saw us the moment we entered. I watched his face cycle through a series of expressions: surprise, confusion, recognition, and finally, fear. He recovered quickly, plastering on the smooth smile that had charmed philanthropic committees and fooled social workers. But I had seen the fear, and that fear told me everything I needed to know. "Angela," he said, gliding toward us through the crowd. "What a surprise. I didn't realize you were invited." "I wasn't," I said, my voice steady despite the pounding of my heart. "But I thought it was time we had a conversation, foster father." His smile flickered. "This is hardly the place for family reunions." "No? Then what about family confessions?" I stepped closer, lowering my voice so that only he could hear. "I know what you did, Horace. I know about the trust fund. I know about the shell companies. I know about the money you've been stealing from me for over 2 decades. And I know about my mother." His face went pale. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Evangeline Valdez. You murdered her on October 27th, 25 years ago. You ran her down with your car because she was getting too close to the truth about her inheritance. And then you spent the next 7 years positioning yourself to become my guardian, all so you could continue to steal from the trust that should have been mine." "This is absurd." His voice was tight, controlled, but I could see the panic flickering behind his eyes. "You have no proof of any of this." "I have all the proof I need." I pulled out my phone, holding up the screen so he could see the face of Caspian's lead investigator, and, more importantly, the list of evidence that would be made public within the hour. "It's over, Horace. The district attorney has everything. The financial records, the witness statements, the forensic analysis of your car, and they have a witness who saw you hit my mother with your own eyes." Horace's composure finally cracked. His face contorted with rage, his carefully maintained mask slipping to reveal the monster beneath. "You stupid girl," he hissed. "You have no idea what you're doing. I made you. I took you in when no one else wanted you. I gave you a home, an education, a future. And this is how you repay me?" "You didn't give me anything," I said, my voice rising, drawing the attention of nearby guests. "You stole everything. My mother's life, my inheritance, my childhood. You took it all, and you made me feel grateful for the scraps you threw me." "Your mother was a fool," he spat. "She could have had everything. I offered to share the fortune with her, to cut her in on the scheme, but she was too righteous, too principled. She was going to expose me, ruin everything I had built. So yes, I eliminated her, and I would do it again." The confession echoed through the suddenly silent ballroom. 500 of the city's most prominent citizens stood frozen, staring at the man they had believed to be a pillar of the community, as he revealed himself to be a murderer and a thief. Horace Renshaw. Finian Reyes stepped forward, federal agents flanking him on either side. "You're under arrest for the murder of Evangeline Valdez and the embezzlement of funds from the Espinoza Trust. You have the right to remain silent." But Horace wasn't going to go quietly. He lunged at me, his face twisted with hate, his hands reaching for my throat. Time seemed to slow. I saw his fingers coming toward me, saw the madness in his eyes. She saw everything I had feared for the past 25 years manifesting in a single moment of violence. And then Caspian was there, stepping between us, taking the blow that was meant for me. They went down together, struggling on the marble floor, and then the federal agents were pulling them apart, and Horace was being handcuffed and dragged away, screaming curses and threats that echoed off the crystal chandeliers. It was over. After 25 years, it was finally over. The weeks that followed were a blur of police interviews, legal proceedings, and media attention. Horace Renshaw's arrest was the story of the year. The beloved philanthropist exposed as a murderer and a thief, the orphan he had victimized finally getting her justice. The trial was swift and decisive. Faced with the mountain of evidence Caspian had assembled, Horace's lawyers had no defense. He was convicted on all counts and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. But the legal resolution was only part of the story. The real resolution came later, in the quiet moments that followed the spectacle. The Espinoza Trust was restored to me in its entirety. Caspian's forensic accountants had traced every dollar Horace had stolen, and the courts ordered full restitution. I suddenly found myself in possession of more money than I had ever imagined. Enough to pay off all my debts, enough to buy a beautiful home in a safe neighborhood, enough to give Marigold the childhood I had always wanted for her. But money, I discovered, wasn't what mattered most. What mattered was the sense of peace that settled over me like a warm blanket. For the first time in my life, I knew the truth about where I came from. I knew that my mother had loved me, had fought for me, had died trying to give me a better future. I knew that I wasn't just a throwaway kid that nobody wanted. I was the daughter of a woman who had been brave and kind and filled with love. And I wasn't alone anymore. Caspian stayed. He could have walked away after the trial, his 25-year mission finally complete. But he didn't. He was there in the mornings, making pancakes for Marigold. He was there in the evenings, helping me navigate the complexities of sudden wealth. He was there in the quiet moments, holding my hand, wiping away my tears, reminding me that I was stronger than I knew. "Why did you stay?" I asked him one night. We were sitting on the porch of my new home, our new home as it was becoming, watching the fireflies dance in the summer darkness. "Because I spent 25 years falling in love with an idea," he said. "The idea of you. The daughter Evangeline loved so much. The woman I knew you would become. And when I finally found you," he turned to face me, his eyes filled with a warmth that made my breath catch. The reality was even more than I had imagined. How could I walk away from that? I leaned into him, resting my head against his shoulder. "My mother would have liked you." "I hope so." He pressed a kiss to my forehead. "I think about her every day. I think about the chance she gave me, the life she made possible for me. Everything I have, everything I am, is because of her kindness on that cold October night. And now you're passing that kindness on to me, to us. It's what she would have wanted." I thought about my mother then, not as a tragedy, not as a ghost, but as a guiding light. She had given me life, not just once, but twice. The first time, when she brought me into the world. The second time, when her kindness to a homeless teenager set in motion a chain of events that would eventually bring him back to save her daughter. Love, I realized, was like that. It rippled outward, touching lives you might never even know about, creating connections that spanned decades and transcended even death. My mother's love had reached forward through time to protect me, to guide Caspian to my door, to ensure that justice would finally be served. And now that love would continue to ripple forward, into Marigold's life, into whatever future Caspian and I built together. It would never end. Love like that never did. The last piece of closure came on a sunny afternoon in late September. Caspian, Marigold, and I stood in front of my mother's grave, a modest headstone that I had never been able to afford to improve. But now, 25 years after her death, I finally had the means to give her the memorial she deserved. The new headstone was made of white marble, simple but elegant. It bore her name, her dates, and a single inscription: Evangeline Valdez, beloved mother. Her love reaches beyond the stars. Marigold placed a small bouquet of wildflowers at the base of the stone. "Is this my other grandma?" she asked, her voice soft with childhood solemnity. "Yes, sweetheart." I knelt beside her, pulling her close. "This is my mommy. She died a long time ago, before you were born. But she would have loved you so much. Like you love me?" Exactly like that. I kissed the top of her head. "And like I'll always love you, no matter what." Caspian stood behind us, his hand resting on my shoulder. I reached up and covered his hand with my own, drawing strength from his presence. "I did it, Mom," I whispered, too softly for anyone but the wind to hear. "I found out the truth. I got justice for you. And I found love, real love, the kind you always wanted for me. I'm happy now. I'm finally, truly happy." A breeze stirred the branches of the tree above us, and for just a moment, I could have sworn I smelled my mother's perfume, soft and floral, the scent I remembered from my earliest childhood. It was probably just my imagination, but in that moment, I chose to believe it was real. I chose to believe that somewhere, somehow, my mother was watching over me, and she was at peace. Remember the words that started this entire journey? "I know what really happened to your mother. I know because I was there the night she was murdered." Those words, spoken by a stranger in a coffee shop, had shattered my world. But from the pieces, something beautiful had emerged. Truth, justice, love. A future I could never have imagined when I was just a struggling single mother, drowning in debt and despair. If you're watching this and you're going through your own struggles, if you feel like the world has knocked you down and you'll never get back up, I want you to know something. The story isn't over. The darkest chapters of your life can lead to the most brilliant dawn. Sometimes the stranger who walks through your door isn't just a customer. Sometimes they're the answer to a prayer you didn't even know you were praying. Don't give up. Don't stop fighting. And never, ever stop believing that love can reach across time and space to find you when you need it most. Because that's what it did for me. That's what my mother's love did for me. And if you've made it to the end of this story, I want you to do one thing. I want you to think about the people who have shown you kindness in your life, the strangers who offered a helping hand, the friends who stood by you in dark times, the family members who loved you unconditionally. Take a moment to remember them. And if you can, reach out and tell them what they meant to you. Because you never know. Your act of gratitude might set off its own ripple effect. Your words might save someone's life, the way my mother's kindness saved Caspian's. And years from now, those ripples might come back to you in ways you never expected. That's the power of love. That's the mystery of it. That's the beautiful, heartbreaking, miraculous truth that I learned in a coffee shop from a customer who turned out to be so much more. This is Angela Valdez, signing off. Thank you for walking this journey with me. And remember, the best chapters of your story are still waiting to be written. Subscribe to this channel so you don't miss what comes next. Like this video if it touched your heart, and leave a comment telling me about a moment when a stranger changed your life. Until next time.